these declines in fertility are really alarming. And they're alarming to the people who can't conceive, for sure, because that's a really difficult struggle for the couples that are having those challenges. It's also difficult for the population as a whole.
Today's guest is Dr. Shanna Swan, and you're really going to want to listen and learn from her as the future of the human race depends on it. I'm not kidding. Dr. Swan's book, Countdown, illuminates the impact that all types of plastics and toxins have on human beings' reproductive capacities. And this has an impact on population, ultimately the workforce, economies, cultures, and society as a whole. You're going to learn a great deal from this podcast by listening to it and be smarter for it. Thanks for joining us, and listen in and learn. Welcome, everybody, to today's version of Curated Insights with Seth Dechtman. Our special guest today is Dr. Shanna Swan, who is the author of Countdown: How Our Modern World is Threatening Sperm Counts, Altering Male and Female Reproductive Development, and Imperiling the Future of the Human Race. Very apocalyptic, Dr. Swan.
Yes, it is. It is.
You know, we've never met in person, but we've met during the pandemic. And I know a little bit of your background from way back before you got into this. You were in the theater.
Right.
And even though I've never physically been near you in person, I do know that your stature, if it's measured, is a little bit below on the lower end of the scale as far as your...
That's safe to say, right?
Right.
Physical.
So, you know, don't judge a book by its cover. Somebody who has, an arts background and is, a smaller package, if you will, can come out with such an apocalyptic and potent, important message for the world. So I want to start in the deep end, some of the ideas in your book. And I'd like you to bring forth how the general public can benefit from your message in their everyday life. So I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this right, but it's bisphenol or bisphenol A.
Yes, good.
And what I understand is it's this chemical that's used in all sorts of plastics, electronics, the balloons that my kids blow up, literally millions of items, the tennis ball cans that are plastic. But it's of particular concern, and not just in general, but for women in particular. Could you share a little bit about that and apply it to how to keep our eye out for what we can do in our daily lives?
Sure. I would actually want to spread out that discussion a little bit and talk about...
I would love that.
Not only bisphenol A, which is certainly a bad actor, something we worry about because it actually can interfere with our body's estrogen and increase it. And that's not good for many health outcomes. But the other sort of class of chemicals are something called phthalates, and that's even a harder word to pronounce. But these are also in plastic, surprisingly.
Sure.
But bisphenol A makes plastic hard, and these phthalates make plastic soft. Kind of like the evil twin, if you will, because the bisphenols make estrogen increase, if you will, and the phthalates actually lower our testosterone. And no man wants that. Okay, so I work in reproduction, and that's the area that includes sperm count and fertility, sexual function. In women, it might be miscarriage and so on and so forth. But all of those things depend on us having enough testosterone and the right amount of estrogen. So these two categories of plasticizers, things in plastic, are concerning to me because if they get into our bodies, they can mess with that reproductive function. So as far as what people can do about this, you can read my book. We have several chapters on where these things are found in our daily life and how to minimize them in our daily life and their impact. But a kind of general thing to think about is soft plastic, think phthalates, right?
Sure.
Tubing, maybe
shower curtains,
rubber duckies,
plastic gloves, stuff like that.
Clothing with plastic in it,
Right.
And then the bisphenols, the hard plastic, that would be like water bottles that are hard, baby bottles that are hard, linings of tin cans, which actually are hard, although a very thin layer, and actually layers of paper that are like cash register receipts. So they're barriers of one kind. And so these things are, in our daily life. And so what can we do? Well, a simple thing. You can go through your kitchen. One of the people I talked to on an interview said, before I talked to you, I went around my kitchen with a big plastic bag, and pretty soon it was full of all the plastics that I pulled off my shelves. So maybe you don't want to go to that extreme, but you might be careful particularly about not heating in plastic, not microwaving in plastic. Right. Temperature is really a bad actor here. Increasing heat causes the phthalates to leave the plastic. They're not tied in there. They're not chemically bound to the plastic. So they can leave when there's more energy from the heat.
And they just dissolve like a water bottle that's left in your bag at the gym that might be hot, or in your vehicle.
Right. So you don't want to let your food or your drink sit around in plastics very long. So that's one thing you can do. You can try to, store your food in other containers, like glass is really good, metal, silicone is good. Some things you think, well, that might be risky. That's kind of squishy, like silicone. It turns out not bad. There are websites you can go to and check things out, whether it's a product, that's wrapping your food, or maybe a cleaning product, a laundry product, a cosmetic. That's another thing we should talk about. So cosmetics, personal care products, have lots of these chemicals in them. And the average woman puts on over 20 of these a day.
Right, like what? Deodorant, body lotions.
Anything fragranced.
Yeah.
Anything fragrance is going to have high levels. And colors, anything colored, like nail polish, lipstick, blush, that's going to have these. Because one of the things that phthalates do is not only, and also there's a class called phenols, it's not that they just make things soft, but they hold the color. They help the product hold the color and hold the smell, the scent.
And so why is that important? Because you might understand that it has a durability, so it has a lasting effect. It stays in you.
It stays in you because the other thing that it does is it increases absorption. So if you put a hand cream on, just put it on the surface.
Sure.
Back 20 minutes later, it's not there. Where did it go? Into your body. And it's carrying it with it. All those chemicals are ingredients in that product. Here's an interesting fact. We don't regulate these very well in the United States.
I read that in the book. Europe does a better job. Europe does a better job.
1,100 chemicals in personal care products. In the US, we ban 11.
Right.
11.
I think what's the phrase that you used? Innocent until proven guilty,
or
something?
Right. That's how we treat chemicals. Yeah. And it might be good for people in the dock, who are being tried. I think it probably is. But for a chemical, not so good.
Right.
Reason is that if the company doesn't do it before it goes into market, where's the testing done? It's done on us. You see, it makes us guinea pigs. And we haven't signed up for this, have we?
No, we didn't. Yeah. I mean, so the phthalates, which are in plastics, as well as the bisphenol A, and they both impact either the testosterone or the estrogen, and they're soluble. So the temperature activates it, they kind of separate, and you ingest it. Give us a sense, like there has been, reading your book, a declination of reproductive challenges that are part of lifestyle, that then the lifestyle is sourced from, us wanting more plastic. It's easier to live. It's faster to do things. But where did that source from? Because people didn't have these reproductive problems 100 years ago, or at least that we didn't know of. What has exacerbated or accelerated this?
So after the Second World War, I start to date this.
Okay.
Because one of the things that happened was there was a growth of the petrochemical industry then, around 1950. And there was this amazing discovery that the byproducts in that industry could be repurposed, which we like to do, into these plastics. So, for the companies, it's a win-win. So rather than having to dump these things, they can make products out of them, make profit off of them. And people like them because the products are really useful. right?
And you mean the byproducts, like the residue, like they manufactured something, but then the
Right,
remains, the remnants of that was then
right,
able to be repurposed. So it was like in their eyes, they're recycling their raw material
right,
to ultimately 60, 70 years later to our detriment of putting the human
right.
race at risk.
Right. And it's everybody was kind of jumping on this bandwagon. So there was Better Living Through Chemistry, right?
Hmm.
And there are ads all over talking about the great, changes in our life that plastic is bringing about. Do you remember The Graduate where
Of
Dustin
course.
was asked? Remember that? He said, "I have a great future for you, my boy," I think, or something like that.
Right.
Plastic.
That's
Right.
I
And that was
when I read your book and we first spoke, I thought of that line in The Graduate where he says, "Son, the
son. Yeah.
future is plastics."
That's it. Right, right. So, and a lot of people jumped on that, and it wasn't suspected, it wasn't criticized. But way back in the early 1900s, there was a guy who identified, his name was Dodds in England, and he identified bisphenol A as estrogenic. He showed it was estrogenic and it was actually going to be used for medication. But instead, they used another.
What to elevate those that weren't deficient in estrogen?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
so it was known for a long time that it was what we call hormonally active, can act like a hormone. And those chemicals that can do that, we call sometimes hormone hackers because they kind of trick our body into, they're pretenders, hormone pretenders. There are not the hormone itself, but they act like the hormone. So you can think of, somebody playing a role. And in that, there can be very, very disruptive to the body. And they can disrupt the hormone systems in many ways. So they're actually called endocrine disruptors. Endocrine equals hormone, and
Sure.
disruptors, we know what those are. So these chemicals got to be studied more and more. And then we have the next big jump, which was in 2000, when chemistry evolved to the point where we could measure this in everybody. How do we do that? You don't know how much is in your body.
Well, either through a DNA analysis, blood, or urine, I would think.
Right. So you mentioned that these were water soluble, and that's true. The good news is that means they leave our body very quickly. So things that are water soluble don't stick around, like fat soluble things stay in the fat, but water soluble things leave the body in the urine, right? So that's good. Four
Okay.
hours average for the half life. That's really quick. But then that gives us the opportunity to collect the urine, send it to a lab. How much phthalates are in this sample? How much bisphenol A is in this sample? That's how we learn that.
Okay, but hold on a minute. If it's soluble, we ingest it, gets activated by heat, but then we can eliminate it through our urine.
Yes.
But it's the fact that it's in our system, it's doing damage.
It can do damage. That's correct. So what we actually measure in the urine is what's called the urinary metabolite, which is the breakdown product in urine of this chemical. But the chemical itself can be doing damage in the body. So you're right. It isn't like it's totally inactive once it's peed out. It's just, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So once the chemistry was available to measure this in small amounts of urine for relatively little money, you could start studying it. You see, if you can't do that, how would I know who's exposed?
Right. If you
Right?
can't measure it, you don't know about it.
You don't know. So it's not like if we want to study smoking, we ask people, did you smoke?
Right.
Right? But you can't do that with these chemicals, right? Because they're hidden. They're hidden and silent and invisible. That's one of the things that makes them really difficult and sneaky, because they're all around us. And you have probably 100 different ones in your body right now that are measurable. So do I.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was that breakthrough in 2000 when the chemistry got ready to do that. And then the toxicologists who study the risks in animals from chemicals that we're concerned about started to look at these. And what they found was that there was a really dramatic effect on the sons of women. They studied the rodents and I studied the women, but in the sons of mothers who were exposed to phthalates. And that was a really big breakthrough. And they actually called the what happened, the phthalate syndrome, which is kind of remarkable that they would set it aside with a name like that, you know?
So it's a direct line, like the common
Right.
thread there from the mother to the child, the male.
Right. That's right. And so that work was done in animals. A friend of mine told me about it when I was flying to Japan on a plane. And he said, Shauna, you should study phthalates. I said, why should I study phthalates? I'd never heard of phthalates, right?
Why should I study them? I don't even know what they are.
Exactly. Why? But I trusted him. He's a friend and a good chemist. So I said, tell me more. So he said, well, you got them in your body right now. Everybody does. So that was fact one. Fact two, these toxicologists have been studying this in animals. And you know what? When the pregnant dam or mother is exposed to these, the son is born in a way which is concerning. They are less typical of a male in their genital areas.
Sure.
So that's, I listened to that and I thought, whoa, could that be going on in humans? And so I set out to study that. And what do I have to do? In the animals, they knew what the pregnant dam was exposed to because they fed it to her. For me, I didn't know, so I had to look in the urine, right? So right then that tells me that I need the urine from pregnant women, right?
Yeah.
And then what the animal toxicologists did was they looked at the newborns and they measured various distances and outcomes in the males and went to see, was that related to what they fed them?
Right. And is that where you talk about the AGD, the anogenital distance?
That's one of them. That's one of them.
Okay.
But the simpler ones to understand are these little male rats who were exposed to phthalates in the womb had smaller everything. We can go into the details if you want.
Sure. Smaller genitalia, smaller testicles, small. Right.
And the testicles were less likely to be in the right place. So you know they should be down in the scrotum, right? If they're not, it's actually a defect. So, and then what turned out to be most important, and this is something that's really hard for most people to get their head around because they'd never heard of it, except if they were on the street and, you know, there's some kind of urban dictionary talk about it, the distance from the anus to the genitals.
Right.
It sounds very mysterious, but you might just think about it as the overall size of the
right. And then, you know, in preparing, you know, it's the taint, the gooch, the
Exactly.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. If you're familiar with those urban dictionary terms, then you're not surprised by it.
Right.
But
and
yeah.
May I ask you a question right there? Because first of all, for a non-scientist and person who's not immersed in this world, that's something that draws your attention. Like, oh my God, you know, not only is it not in the common vernacular of every day, but you're like a very specific area to measure, but it's important because it has an impact on a lot of other things that you're going to explain. But my question is, when the observation was made from the urine and there were all these measurements observed, was it so obvious that the anogenital distance was reduced or impacted that they started measuring it? Or was this something that historically had been measured for another reason? Or
Great question.
Just a curiosity?
Great question. So in animals, it had been used for at least 50 years.
Okay. And why was that?
I have an animal study back in 1902 where they measured it. Okay.
Wow.
So it wasn't a new thing in the animal world. Why did they do that? Because they realized that if they were going to test a chemical for its safety, you want to look at this distance. It was recognized that this was an important distance for relative to the safety of the chemical. And why is that? Because if something shortens that distance in males, it tells you a lot about that chemical. It tells you it lowers testosterone. This distance depends completely, aside from some genetic factors, on how much testosterone is in the womb at that time.
And you're born that way, and that's it. Like, you know,
that's it.
That's it. Okay.
Relative to your body size, of course.
Right. I mean, as you grow, it's proportionate, but it's not like that corresponding measurement is going to somehow percentage-wise expand relative to when you were born.
That's right. So when I heard about this pretty exciting animal work and this chemical that my friend told me about, I thought, you know, let's see what the children born to these women whose phthalates we had now measured, let's see what the children's anogenital distance looks like.
No different than you did with the rats.
Exactly.
Right.
And I didn't do the rat studies, but I did the human studies. Yeah.
Sure.
And so I was the person that brought that into this field, that this was an important measure. But then I stepped back and you said, would you see anything weird about these boys? No. You would not notice on view that
Sure.
this boy is abnormal. It's not a birth defect. It's nothing dramatic. It's a small change. So why do we care? You want to know why we care?
I'm all ears. I'm seriously, we've gotten the conversation this far. Reveal it.
Now you want to know?
Yeah, now.
All right. So I'll tell you a whole lot of things it means. Boys can be born with certain birth defects, various kinds, defects to the penis, defects to the scrotum, blah, 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 blah. Those defects are more common when that distance is shorter. And that was shown in several studies. So right there, it's not good news for the infant.
And going backwards, the distance is shorter and those defects occur based on the presence of phthalates.
Correct. Or other things that lower testosterone. The shorter anogenital distance doesn't specifically tell you there was phthalates around. It tells you there was something that lowered testosterone. Could have been a hormone imbalance. It could have been another chemical. There are other chemicals that do this, right? So that's one bad thing that can happen. There can be more of these genital defects. And those defects, by the way, when that boy grows up, he's going to have, on average, a lower sperm count and have more trouble having children, more likely to be infertile. So right there, that's not good news. But that's just the beginning. Right.
And that's where you talk a little bit about the motility and the morphology, right? Where it's the shape or the form of it. And
that's the quality of the sperm. Those are the various things that you're right, can be affected by these birth defects. The whole population of boys that we studied, and we studied hundreds and hundreds of them, the whole population with those that have a shorter anogenital distance will have a lower sperm count, and they will be less likely to conceive a child, and they will be more likely to develop testicular cancer. So anything that depends on testosterone as you grow up, including your testosterone levels, which are also lower, that's concerning for many men who are worrying about low testosterone. This playing a role here.
Right. Because I also learned in the book, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm jumping a little bit all over the place. You do such a nice job of talking to a non-scientist, but this is becoming more and more common. And, when there's a miscarriage, it's often, I don't know, just thinking it's over on the woman, but it often can be a result of sperm that are not healthy.
That's correct.
And what I think of to the people listening here is you often hear women are having children later in life, and it's more challenging for not just for phthalates or other chemicals that are impacting the body and the fertility process. They in their 20s are encouraged to save eggs, right? Hold on to and store eggs. Now I can see that men need to get aware of their sperm levels and the motility and the whole kind of system of your sperm, so that men might start banking them on their own as well. Is that something you would recommend?
Absolutely. I certainly recommend a man get his sperm tested. And this is a little digression from your question, but I just want to take the opportunity to point out that men with low sperm count have more heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancers, reproductive cancers, and they die earlier. So wouldn't you like to know if you were at risk of these things?
Yeah. I mean, look, we get our cholesterol checked, our insulin, our, heavy metals are, doctors ask to, do you have, I don't know, all these aluminum or whatever in your, I think it should be a standard practice.
I agree with you. Thank you. And more men are getting their sperm tested. And by the way, it used to be pretty onerous. You'd have to find the right lab, and you have to go as embarrassing. You sit in the waiting room, and you have to go in this other room and give your sample and bring it out and hand it to someone. That's all been removed now. There are many companies that will do a very good job on analyzing a sample that you send in through the mail, collect it in the privacy of your home, send it no embarrassment. And I highly recommend that people do this because, as you say, you want to know your blood pressure and your cholesterol. Why wouldn't you want to know this?
Right. I mean, there's services like 23, that do your whole DNA.
Right.
I mean, like, it's like they're missing this huge pink elephant in the room,
Right.
Now,
for women, it's not so easy, right? Because while a woman would love to know if she's running out of eggs, wouldn't you like to know that? Because
it would be a good piece of information,
would it be, It's very much more difficult. You can't do it at home. You have to go to a center where they can do an ultrasound. And then that doesn't even tell you the quality, just the number. So to look at the quality is even more difficult. So women are challenged because their genitals are not accessible and their germ cells are not accessible. So they can't maybe take that much care of themselves as they could, but they could freeze their eggs. And so I think this is something that women may want to think about. It's not as easy as giving a sperm sample.
Right.
So,
it's important. I can't help, my mind wanders now. So it begs the question of going back a little bit into a bigger context here. There's, I don't know if the right word is phenomenon, but there's a tendency now where men are impacted based on their AGD. And we need to make it common practice, no different than getting your blood work done, checking out at an early age, the health of your sperm, women as well, maybe freeze the eggs and the sperm so that you're in position, if you want to conceive, then you're setting yourself up to be successful. What's the bigger impact on the world population because I know there's two questions and then you can probably talk for 3 or 4 more hours on this. It's not just humans in your book. I mean, it's animals, the frogs, it's not just the humans that are ingesting these chemicals. So it's a 17-part question, But so talk about population impact and all that good stuff.
Right. So the AGD is really important, but really what people are most concerned about is not their AGD. Many are concerned about their inability to have children. And other people who maybe not worry about their own particular child are worrying about the number of children that are being produced in the world, which is dropping dramatically. If we back up a minute, we see the decline in sperm count, which we published in 2017, count or concentration, has gone down at the rate of about 1% a year. So it's gone down 50% in 50 years, roughly speaking, right? And
wow.
If you think about that, 1% a year doesn't sound like very much. But if you think about 50 years, that's cutting in half the number of the sperm you produce. Think about if in 50 years you doubled your BMI. I mean, what?
Yeah.
Right? Very.
Yeah. And you wouldn't make it to 50 years, I don't think.
So if you think about how important 1% a year is, it's a lot. It's very fast. It's too fast to be genetic. It's got to be environmental. And so that's what's driving my work and the work of lots and lots of other scientists who are trying to find these environmental causes that are driving down sperm count and driving down testosterone and lots of other things that are going to hell in a handbasket at the same rate, I like to say. And what does that impact on fertility? So fertility is really complicated because it takes men and women to make a baby. And the things that interfere are not only chemical, for sure. So one of the things that interferes is that as the population gets more educated, the number of children born goes down. As the amount of contraception available goes up, the number of children goes down. Urbanization goes up, number of children goes down. So these are factors which are certainly important, and I don't want to suggest that they're not. They're extremely important. But it also turns out that young women who want to have children are now much less able to. So that's not an aging thing. It's not probably a contraceptive thing.
Right.
Okay.
It's an external factor.
It's an external factor. That's good. And something that they have no control over. And then if you talk about the other species, they are also experiencing fertility declines. And they are not choosing this. They are not given contraception. They're not being urbanized. Right. They're not being educated.
They're not planning a city and, right. Yeah.
And they are decreasing in numbers. I just read today that there were 20 more extinct species.
Right. I saw that. That was in the Times, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's just devastating.
And flora too.
Yeah. That's right. So we're in this together in this web of life on the earth, and we're all being affected by these chemicals. And by the way, they are found everywhere. They're found in the Arctic Circle. It's not just industrialized countries. Arctic Circle, bottom of the Marianas Trench, everywhere, because they're carried by air currents and water currents and so on. So these declines in fertility are really alarming. And they're alarming to the people who can't conceive, for sure, because that's a really difficult struggle for the couples that are having those challenges. It's also difficult for the population as a whole. The normal shape of the population is a pyramid, right? So very few on top, lots on the bottom. And that's worked for a very, very long time, where this very big base grows up to be of working age. That's still a pretty big base, and supports the people on top. Not so many on top, much more down here, right? So that's the normal population pyramid. What's happening now is called the inversion of the population pyramid. And just think about standing that pyramid on its head. We're not quite there. We're not down to this.
Right. We're not where the tip is on the floor, but we're moving in that direction.
We're moving in that direction. The top is getting bigger and bigger, and the bottom is getting smaller and smaller. So that means that there are fewer people in the labor force, which is really a problem for the economy. The people in those middle ages between 16 and 65 have to take care of everybody else, and there's not enough of them. They're not able to support things like Medicare, Social Security, and the economic impacts are huge, which is why countries that are really having such a low fertility rate, like Singapore and China and Japan, are offering economic incentives to get people to
Hong Kong,
and it's not working. It is not working. We can talk about why, but I think this is one of the major challenges of our population worldwide today, on top of the other challenges we're facing that we really have to address.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, they're trying to get the infrastructure bill passed because you need the Lincoln and Holland Tunnel where you live, and the Washington Bridge and the Verrazano. It all needs to be operating. The Queens, all the bridges need to work, but none of that's going to matter if there's no people to be able to, it's again, I use the word apocalyptic, but it's a holistic approach. Okay, let's get the infrastructure, but what about regulating these chemicals? And what about making part of your daily annual checkup, checking out your fertility, whether you're a man or a woman, your sperm or your eggs, and having that something that's monitored? Because if the peril of the human race is at play, then what's the point of the rest of the stuff? Kind of
the Holland Tunnels, there's nobody to ride in it, right?
Right, exactly. What's the point of having it refaced and refurbished and redone, if nobody can move through it? Right. Well said. Well said. Is there anything else that I know in the beginning we just went into like how to mitigate some of these things. I know for me, when I read the book, I now have 2 water bottles that are aluminum.
Great.
And I notice even in my kitchen still, there's Tupperware, and we're trying to transition over to glass, but plastic, the toothbrush, the receptacle that the toothpaste comes in, the mouthwash, the shampoo, the liquid soap. Look, I'm like very proud. Oh, my deodorant doesn't have aluminum, but it's encased in plastic.
Right. Yeah. Well, maybe I should mention that not all plastic is equally bad, right? And one clue is the number that's in that little triangle at the bottom of a lot of things. So if you turn over a water bottle, you can see the numbers, they're 1 through 7 in the bottom.
Okay.
And the number, here's a little ditty that people can remember really easily that helps. And it's 4, 5, 1, and 2. All the rest are bad for you. So if you look to that number and it's 1, 2, 4, or 5, you can go, okay, I'm probably good to go.
Okay.
And so that's a good way to help sort, your plastics.
Right. And we have pets, and we changed their bowl back to metal. It was this cute little plastic. It had some drawings on it and whatnot. But even them, just because testosterone is important. I'm going back all over the place here, but I was reading when I was preparing to talk to you Is there a direct line from testosterone to your sperm count, the fertility, the success of your sperm being able to reproduce?
Absolutely.
Okay, but it is testosterone levels also involved. I was reading in the digestive process as well,
I don't
where
know that. I
okay,
don't know that, but there's
I read that somewhere where
I wouldn't be surprised.
it's an aid in, like among many things, you know, your
That's an
cortisol, your insulin.
But Seth, they're intimately involved in the development of your brain.
Mm,
So they have to do with, lots of functions in the brain that are, again, somewhat different in genetic males and genetic females. And those differences are actually decreased in the presence of phthalates. We show that in a couple of studies.
wow.
So it's everywhere. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it's pervasive.
right.
So what are you working on right now, apart from the success of the book and,
I'll tell
all
you
these?
something you'd be very interested in. Just today, I got on a call with 3 urologists, and we're designing a study where we're going to look at men who come into their clinics for a variety of reasons. Might be post-vasectomy, might be low testosterone, might be ED. And we're going to ask for permission to measure their AGD, and then we're going to look at that in relation to their score, which is the score that is used to classify a man as having erectile dysfunction. So basically what we're looking at is AG shorter in men who have erectile dysfunction?
Right. And I think I remember the distance is 2
Uh,
average from your Rochester study. Is that right?
well, that's an average.
That's an average.
I think that was with our infants. I can't, honestly, I don't want to use that number
Okay.
because I
right.
would have to look again.
No, but that's really, and that's exciting for you because you can then study another impact.
Exactly. And it's really important because it's something that is in the forefront of everyone's, well, not everyone's, but certainly a lot of men's minds now, because these doctors were telling me that the numbers of men coming in their 20s and 30s even
Wow.
is rapidly increasing.
Wow.
So this is definitely concerning. And I just want to throw in here that there's a study out of China where men who manufactured BPA had more erectile dysfunction.
Yeah.
So there's no question that these chemicals affect not only the sperm, but also the libido, if you will, drives us to have sex and
and as you said, impacts the brain and perhaps the digestive system. I'm going to look into that a little bit further.
Great.
If you'd like to learn more about this speaker, visit our website at thekeynotecurators.com. There you'll find dozens of videos of speakers that are a perfect fit for your event. If you'd like to reach out directly, please click on the link below in the description. My name is Seth Dechtman, and you've been watching Curated Insights.